What's up, guys? My name is Fari, and I build systems that remove bottlenecks within businesses. And I've been documenting my builds for 124 days now, going up to 365. And in today's video, we're going to be going through why every system needs an expiry date, and we're going to be tackling this in my usual manner of building it out in layers. So, where we're basically going to be going through the problem layer, the core insight layer, the mechanism layer, and as well as the outcome layer. So, we can start off by taking this nice and slow and looking at the problem there, where we basically look at how builders create a system once and then they assume that it lasts forever. But in reality, you have multiple different factors that come to play, which involve markets changing, teams evolving, and tools getting outdated. And this can come to markets changing. People want different things, and the market's needs will always shift. And understanding how it will shift when you build this solution, you also need to be able to understand that this system is not going to be permanent. It's going to be ever changing, and once you build it, you're going to make sure that you're also going to be refining it, not just today but going on into the future as well, because you can never build a system and expect it to last forever, in my opinion. And that ultimately is a function of understanding that if you want to create value, you need to also make sure that you're innovating and improving on the value, because what is creating value today might not create value into the future. At least from my own experience, that you may see that hey, this specific market that we were solving a problem for, they don't have that problem anymore because they've moved on to a new stage where they're having a different set of problem that involves in us just tweaking and innovating on our solution that we have in that moment in time. And also understanding that teams evolve. Your internal team, external teams will ultimately evolve. People will gain certain skills, and those skills will be ever changing. And through that ever changing landscape of their skill sets that they've stacked, you also need to be able to take that into consideration, because what makes sense in terms of what people understand today might not be the thing that people understand into the future, because processes will change, workflows will change. But how would that ultimately create value for you if your system is getting left behind and you built it in a manner that, hey, this system is simply just going to last forever, and it's going to be ever changing, and it's never going to change? And that is not the case. Systems need to have an expiry date, and this date needs to understanding that this date is where the system needs to get refined. And tools also get outdated. The tools that everyone else might be using today will not be the same tools that everyone else will be using into the future. And this is just my personal opinion of how the evolution of technology goes. People don't use the same set of tools that they used 100 or two, or maybe not that far, but let's say a year or two ago. They use a new set of tools that ultimately solve problems in the way that they need them to be solved for. And taking that approach, that means that the result we're ultimately gaining or getting from this is that the system becomes bottlenecks, or systems become bottlenecks rather than them becoming leverage. Your systems ultimately become bottlenecks rather than becoming leverage, because they're simply outdated. They have this perception of these systems are going to be everlasting. We're going to build it once and we're never going to touch it ever again, and it's just going to keep on spewing data or keep on spewing value. But that's not always the case. It also needs to make sure that we have the insights that ultimately allow us to power what it is that we're solving for. And this comes through the insight layer, where we understand that every system should be designed with a built-in expiry date, where we apply systems thinking principles like nothing is perfect, such as nothing is perfect, and a system either compounds in value or compounds in inefficiency. And I'm just going to pause it right there, because I think this is one of the most important takeaways from this video that I want you to have, is that a system either compounds in its value output or it compounds in its inefficiencies. And what you want is not the latter, but rather it compounding in value. And how do you possibly approach this? There are many different videos that I've made in terms of how to think about this, and how we're also thinking and approaching this as well. But also understanding that your systems having an internal expiry date of saying, hey, These systems are only going to last us until this certain point, and then when we hit this certain point, we then going to have to innovate in order to keep up with the demanding changes that are happening, whether it's team evolution, market changes, or even just tools getting outdated. We need to make sure that we're understanding that our systems that we're building internally and externally as well are compounding in value rather than inefficiencies, and asking questions such as, what are the flows looking like, what are the inflows, what are the processes, and what are the outflows that are governing how we are approaching this as well, and are we making sure that we're planning for reinvention in order to avoid entropy. Because what you don't want to happen is that you have this mindset where this system is going to be everlasting. You're only going to focus on this system and it's going to solve all your problems for the next 10 years, and that is not always the case. You need to make sure that you're setting somewhat of an expiry date of which this system that you're running or using within your current workflow needs to be reinvented. If you're not constantly reinventing this system in terms of giving it an expiry date and understanding how the markets may change and team evolution may also happen, then you also need to make sure that you're taking the approach of planning before it happens, or you get to the stage where things change and then you're like, okay, so now what do I do? Because that is the worst place you want to be. You want to make sure that you're constantly compounding in value so that you get rid of the compounding inefficiencies that gather or scale through time, because your business is either going to grow and those inefficiencies are going to grow with it, or rather, if you create value and you focus on value outputs, then the value is going to grow with the business as well. And it's just making sure that you understand that each and every system that you build and are also making use of within your internal processes, that you're also just taking the approach of understanding that this has an expiry date, and we understand from this expiry date how we're going to be moving into the future. And I think this also needs to be tied in with the mechanisms, basically the different levers that you can ultimately pull as well. And the way that I see it is ultimately by adding a review loop to every build. So basically you say, hey, with the light systems we review every 30 to 60 days, which ultimately gives you a window where you can ultimately see, hey, is this working, is this not working? And you can ask deeper and deeper questions that ultimately allow you to then gather those data points. And also metrics as well are super important in terms of fully understanding that, hey, is this actively working? What are the metrics showing us? And how is it gonna, how can we predict through these patterns how it's gonna function into the future? And I think this is one of the most important things, because if you're constantly, reinventing or just, making sure that you're looking at it and just understanding it from a far deeper level in terms of your light systems, that you're then able to understand that, hey, we have this 30 to 60 day window where we're constantly just analyzing what is going on. Is it constantly serving, is it solving for our inefficiencies, or is it compounding in value? And fully understanding that the core operating systems as well need to be reviewed every 90 days. So these are core operating systems that are a lot deeper and a lot more integrated within the business, which require a longer time period to see how they're actively functioning within the business. And understanding that for these core operating systems that are running within the system as well, that we need to make sure that we're compounding or building them in a way that we can review them in the couple of days, or in a couple of in a longer time window. And also understanding that through this we need to make sure that we're also asking questions as well. I duplicated that, but I just wanted to make sure that we're also asking questions as well that ultimately allow us to take a look at these loops at a far deeper level, so that we're constantly just reimagining of what we see in terms of the data and as well as the output as well. And then understanding that this ultimately needs to have an outcome whereby we look at this and say, hey, this is where we are then able to force continuous optimization and prevent hidden inefficiencies from stacking. Because the number one thing is that we want to make sure that we understand all the inefficiencies that may be forming, that we may not see, and that comes as a result of understanding how the data is working in terms of how the system is functioning, as well as what metrics we're actually picking up as well. well, and understanding that we're creating agility while keeping the core tight, and understanding that we want to be as flexible as possible, but we want to make sure that we're keeping the core aspects of it as tight as possible, so that when we are then moving or integrating different things, that we keep the core, as it is, and that we understand that the core requires a longer time period in order to evaluate and assess as well. Then we're then able to understand that we need to build resilience where nothing breaks silently over time, because the number one thing that you want or don't want to happen is ultimately things happening that ultimately break your resilience over time. And also making sure that we understand that we are focusing on understanding that systems have an expiry date, and through this expiry date we're then able to build well into the future. And this is one of the things that I have been on a rant on a little bit past the past few days, in terms of understanding that nothing is everlasting, and things have inflows, processes, and outflows, and these different inflows, outflows, and processes are governed by different things or different variables that may change, such as markets changing, teams evolving, or tools getting outdated. And that's why I believe just setting an internal expiry date in terms of the systems that we are ultimately using also means that we are then taking the approach of making sure that our systems, we're never taking an everlasting approach, but we're also making sure that we're hitting the compounding value rather than the compounding inefficiencies, and asking questions as well, because I think that is one of the most important things to constantly do, to ask those deep meaningful questions, to ask why 5 times until you get to the root of what it is that you're doing, and then from there reason up and ultimately just build. And yeah, this is super exciting. We're 124 days now, and it's been one interesting ride. I know that we still have a long way to go, but it's super exciting just to just chat about systems and learn each and every single day about how to present these videos, and also just to share I think it's one of the best things that ultimately has happened lately. So I just want to focus on creating more value, making sure that I'm producing more value so that it's more valuable to you guys. And if you guys have any questions, comments, or just even just roasting, just let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear all your opinions in terms of things that I could improve and also just iterate on as well. And yeah, if you guys want to connect with me, X, LinkedIn, Instagram, and I also have a newsletter that I recently just rolled out, so you guys can check it out as well. It's the first link in the description, and I will see you guys in the next video.